Hey guys, Scripted, we're here with another video, and I wanted to delve into the whole Mara Jade and Clone Palpatine and all that stuff from the EU, and some of the stuff George Lucas said about it. I know there are videos about this. This is going to be different. I've discovered a few things, looked into a few things, and I think we can come to a pretty reasonable conclusion. It doesn't mean that anything is valid or invalid just because George Lucas said so. Because ultimately we all are fans of what we're fans of. So, that's on the side burner. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to just look at the facts, look at what we can see. And I mean, let's face it. For most of us, the sequel trilogy is not in our canon. Most of what Disney's done is not in our canon. So, or if not all of it. So, this isn't about creating some sort of big, fight with everybody. Although, it is a very interesting debate, and that's what I'm looking for is the debate. And I think it'd be fun to look into, so let's check this out. First of all, we'll start with this interview, and we'll go from there. And this is an interview with Lucy Autrey Wilson, who was the director of publishing for Lucasfilm. So obviously all the EU books and stuff like that, she was essentially the director.
And actually, I will tell you another kind of anecdote. One of the first things I licensed was that Dark Horse, the Tom Beach and Cam Kennedy thing. But what Tom Beach, the story he wrote, we were just kind of letting people do what they wanted then. He wrote his story. I didn't ask George anything. We published it. Later, George would run into me and he'd say, Lucy, I would never clone the Emperor. He doesn't get cloned. And I'm like, how am I supposed to know that if you don't want to be involved in what we're doing, and yet if I do something you don't like? So I started then having to send him memos. This person wants to do this, and this. Is this okay? Is that okay?
And I just thought it was really cool, really important, I should say, to look into this. And I don't know how much George was involved in the really, really old EU stuff, like Splinter of a Mind's Eye and stuff like that. But I do know that the average person, if you ask them, for the average person, the EU for them sort of starts with the stuff in the early 90s and the Heir to the Empire trilogy and all that type of stuff. And that stuff, she was the director of. Autrey was the director and sending out stories to get them published and this and that and the other thing. And like she said, she was doing that without any permission from George, without even going through him about anything. So I suspect that everything in the EU up to that point, up to that discussion that George had with her after she published Dark Empire, maybe he just literally had no involvement with that stuff. And then after she did something he clearly was not a fan of and was not into, then he started getting more involved. And that raises some questions because the Dark Empire series was first published in 1991 and also in 1992. So 1991, and Mara Jade's first appearance is in Heir to the Empire, which was also published in 1991. So a lot of whether or not George supported Mara Jade as a character, because we know he didn't support Palpatine being cloned. She says that very clearly.
I don't know if you watched the new movies, but in the most recent one, the Emperor was cloned. So
George by rolling his eyes.
He probably was not
be furious, I think.
So a lot of the idea of whether or not he approved of Mara Jade kind of hinges on when George spoke to her. Now, she doesn't mention anything about Mara Jade. And what's interesting is that Dark Empire came out or was published in December of 1991, whereas Heir to the Empire, the first one, was published in May of 1991. So what does that mean? That means that he might have had an issue with Mara Jade, but maybe he just kind of left it and it was in the less egregious category compared to the Palpatine being cloned, and therefore didn't make a big issue out of it. But does that mean that he was in support of it? Because we have to remember, those books came out before he started getting involved. It was the cloning of Palpatine, according to Autrey, that made him start getting involved and forced her to start sending the ideas that they were going to publish and stuff over to George and over to Lucasfilm for approval. That was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. But before that, he wasn't really paying much attention. So it's not as if he, quote, approved formally of Mara Jade. If Heir to the Empire had come out after Dark Empire, when she started sending stuff to him, then you could say, oh, well, definitely it was approved. It had to be. Everything after that went through him, or went through at least some of his people. So currently in this video, we are not at a point where we can definitively say that he was pro Mara Jade. In fact, we don't know what he is, but we do have some other things we can look into to see what he thinks about the whole situation. And just a quick side note, the idea that the people at Lucasfilm, like J.J. Abrams and all these people, didn't know that George didn't want Palpatine cloned, and yet they did it anyway. It just goes to show, right? Like, they weren't interested in what George wanted at all, despite the fact that Bob Iger said they would. The guy got hoodwinked. And from what I'm seeing from some of the stuff that George talked about, he wasn't big on the whole cloning thing in general. This was an interview with Timothy Zahn, which took place, how long ago was this? This is put out in 2000. And he talks about a whole slew of things. There's a few things from this interview we'll also discuss, but he says Jorith Saboath was originally an insane clone of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they wouldn't let him do that. But then at the same time, in the end, Jorith Saboath was a clone himself. So it was kind of a weird dynamic. And then at the same time, that also brings up the question that if George wasn't involved, who said he couldn't do a clone of Obi-Wan? Because this, again, happens before the release of Dark Empire. So it's a very strange, weird dynamic. This is what I gather between what Tim Zahn is saying and what Lucy was saying, is that I think what happened here is, I think Timothy Zahn was in touch with people at Lucasfilm, because he doesn't specifically say George Lucas, he just says they. So I think he was in touch with Autrey, potentially, and other people at Lucasfilm, or other people representing Lucasfilm, and they told him not to do that. Whereas with the Clone Emperor, that was a direct, why did you do that, from George Lucas? And bear in mind, that book still got released. So somebody at Lucasfilm was okay, I guess, with Emperor Palpatine being cloned, and it does look like a lot of this stuff was happening without George's knowledge, which makes me wonder if Mara Jade also happened originally without George's knowledge, because it came out earlier. Heir to the Empire came out earlier than Dark Empire. Do you see how it all kind of makes sense? So then Timothy Zahn is asked, did you expect Luke and Mara to get married? And he says, yes, I always intended that they would. Okay. Then he says, they came back at the end of 93. They, right? These are the publishers. They came back at the end of 93 and asked me to do one more book to sort of bookend the Bantam series. I thought about it for a while and came up with two things I needed to do if I was to do the book. One was to end the war between the New Republic and the Empire, and two, to get Luke and Mara together. If we're going to do some kind of closure on the Bantam series, those two events needed to be done. And at first, he doesn't say George, they were unwilling to have Luke and Mara married, engaged, whatever. They wanted it left ambiguous. And I said those were two things I feel are needed for closure, and if it wasn't agreeable, someone else could do the book. That's fine, and it was one book originally. So Timothy Zahn was prepared to die on this hill. That the New Republic and the Empire were going to be done, which is good, and that Luke and Mara were going to be married, which I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not a huge fan, to be honest, but whatever. Of Luke being married to anybody, but whatever. But he was willing to die on that hill and say, fine, I'm not doing it then. And then he says, they came back and agreed to let me do that. Which, all of this points to the idea that George was not involved with this. These are other representatives, other people. And again, his involvement came later at the end of 1991 into 1992 after they cloned Palpatine. Okay, so the next on the timeline is this quote from George Lucas and what he has to say about the cloning of Palpatine, Luke, all that stuff. And this was kind of the inspiration for this video. That's when I really wanted to really delve into the dates and people involved and interviews and all that stuff. It's called George Lucas Was Terrible at Predicting the Future of Star Wars. Turns out George Lucas really did think that the final installment to the Star Wars tale was Return of the Jedi. An interview with the iconic filmmaker from May 2008 has revealed that George Lucas didn't have any plans to make episodes 7 to 9, which probably explains why J.J. Abrams was hired to add to the franchise. And this is another one of those ones where George kind of goes back and forth because he didn't want to make it, but he did want to make it. But he didn't want to make it, but then he sold it to Disney and gave them his treatments, hoping they'd make it in the way he wanted. So he was very indecisive, and that's why I think there's always a lot of discussion about the whole EU issue and how much of it he was really that interested in. And I think it's like everything. I think he was interested in some stuff and not interested in other stuff. And in these two particular cases, we've already established he did not want Palpatine being cloned. And I also think he did not want Luke marrying Mara Jade. George Lucas made these remarks during an interview with Total Film over 5 years ago. December 4th, 2014. Okay, so yeah, whatever. 2008. And now that the first trailer for Star Wars The Force Awakens has got everyone heated up about the franchise once again, his contradictory statement has started to make the rounds on social media. After being asked, "Are you happy for new Star Wars tales to be told after you're gone?" George Lucas was pretty adamant that there wouldn't be any further adventures set in a galaxy far, far away. Again, this is 5 years before Force Awakens. More than 5 years before Force Awakens. "I've left pretty explicit instructions for there not to be any more features. There will definitely be no episodes 7 through 9. That's because there isn't any story. There isn't any story." Meanwhile, the Star Wars archives say there kind of was a story. So he's saying that. Other people are writing down in books that no, there was some stuff there. So you're kind of, I guess maybe there was certain ideas but no story. Maybe that's what he means, right? I mean, I never thought of anything. And now there have been novels about the events after Episode 4, which isn't all what I would have done with it. The Star Wars story is really the... Okay, let me just stop there. He also, in an interview, though, says to JJ...
JJ, what happened to Darth Vader's grandchildren?
Oh, George. This is great. You tell me, man. You made all this shit up.
So that aspect of the EU he clearly liked. He liked the issue of, or the aspect of Vader's grandchildren. Certainly at least Han and Leia's kids, but maybe not Luke having kids. The story of Star Wars is really the tragedy of Darth Vader. That is the story. Once Vader dies, he doesn't come back to life. The Emperor doesn't get cloned, and Luke doesn't get married. Sounds pretty adamant to me, because, again, he's lumping in the Luke getting married with the cloned Emperor, which we know right off the bat when that book was released he was not happy about. Now he's lumping them together. He didn't at the time when he was talking to Lucy, although, or maybe he did, she just didn't bring it up in that interview, but he's definitely lumping them in at this point in 2008.
As the creator of Mara Jade,
Wait! I am not the creator of Mara Jade, and I want you to get out of this office right now.
I'm sorry, Zahn.
No way.
You brought you brought it on yourself.
I don't want you here.
So if you watch that clip, you notice those flashes. That's because this is not an organic thing, if you haven't noticed.
I'm so
Out.
sorry, George. I didn't think it would go like this.
Out.
Ted, I got your voucher.
Out! There.
I love how it's like this slow, crappy door, too. It wasn't even like a door slam. This slow push-button door on George's fancy office.
I'm sorry about that. I'm so sorry. We'll have him, burned and... We'll
I don't even know who that guy is.
So, this. I'll show you the context here. This next clip shows you the context of what they were actually doing. It's pretty obvious.
Have you been hiding back
Where
there?
did you? Have you been back there behind the board this whole
This guy's a
time?
boffin.
I'd like to reshoot it and have everyone act really awkward.
Okay.
And like, and then just get.
I think just filming you talking about how you want your ratio to go.
What, have you become the director all of a sudden?
Yeah, I'd like.
Yeah, so they set up a skit. They knew that George was not a big fan of Mara Jade, or at least what was done with the character. So they set up a thing and made a joke about it. But the fact that they made a joke about it means it is something, right? That you don't just make up this joke that really doesn't impact George or doesn't matter to him. It's because there is that background of him not being the biggest fan of Mara Jade. That's my take. I think it's pretty obvious.
Seb, if you're going to direct this thing, you need a hat, a megaphone, and some
what's your
riding
vision?
pants.
Your
My
vision.
vision is it's awkward. I ask my questions. We get a response shot of George just staring at me, like saying, "I have no idea who you are."
Okay.
And then I say, "Well, then, as the creator of Mara Jade."
This is gonna be.
I have no idea who you are.
Well, exactly.
I don't even know how you got
I'm
here.
not asking for much.
See, there you go, right? It's pretty obvious. It was all set up. But it's all based on a certain degree of truth, right?
And you
Well,
are
I know.
funny.
Whenever I tell people that
Yeah.
you're funny, they're like, "He's funny," and I'm like, "He
No,
is."
I don't let people know about that.
I know.
Yeah.
But it's hard to not know that I'm funny if you've seen the movies. But most people don't even understand the humor because it's funny to me, but it's not funny to anybody else.
So I think what we can conclude here is that on the one hand, there were things from the EU that he liked, clearly. And there were other things that he didn't like. And that he was pretty loose in terms of his involvement. He had other people, other representatives making those decisions for him, what those stories were going to be. Which makes you wonder how much he ever really did view them as, quote, canon per se, because he's allowing other people. But it's, that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't, but you do have to wonder. But I think we can safely conclude that Luke was not supposed to get married. And I don't think that means he hates Mary Jade. He obviously doesn't take it that seriously if he's willing to joke around about it. But he also doesn't like her character in the sense that she was married to Luke and having children. That wasn't his thing. She wasn't in his sequel trilogy. But he did have, I think, Han and Leia's kids for sure. And he also was not a fan of Palpatine being cloned. And one thing, whether you like this video or not, or whether you agree with me or not, or whether you believe whatever you believe about the EU and Mara Jade, I think we can all agree, even if you liked Dark Empire and Palpatine being cloned in Dark Empire, I think we can all agree that what they did with the sequel trilogy and Palpatine was really, really, really awful, regardless of anything else. Anyways, guys, leave a comment. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this video and on this topic. And as usual, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. It always helps the channel. Feel free to check anything else on my channel. Have yourselves a really good day.
Me's always been a bigger boss than us.
There are times when I really feel bad about what I've done. and that was one of them.